I am joined today very pleasantly by an absolute surprise to me because Anna, we don't know each other, do we?
No, we do not.
No. Okay. So we came into contact purely randomly through a WhatsApp group, which is essentially about political analysis. And you are actually a sort of a meritable member of this group. I'm simply a completely unknown inductee. But do you want to talk a little bit about the group that we met in?
Yes, of course. So all of this happened sort of randomly for me too. About 2 years ago, I just finished my bachelor's degree in international relations, and Dr. Dajvidi was my teacher in my second year. And we sort of got to speaking and found out that we have a lot of similar interests, and it was very interesting, the political conversation, the personal ones too. And he invited me to be part of this amazing research forum where, it's absolutely filled with his former students and friends and colleagues all across the world, all sort of politically interested and, most of them also with credible credentials to go with it. So, I think that's sort of the group. It's filled with PhDs and, other intellectual merits. I think that's how we met.
Yeah, absolutely crazy. So it is, as you say, full of very sort of internationally based in elements, people from the Middle East, but also as far flung as the USA. Are there any? There is somebody, isn't there, from Japan, unless I'm mistaken?
Yes, I think there's people from Japan. There's people who they're basically from all over the world, wherever they happen to be living. People that are experts in Cuban studies, Cuban American studies. We had a lecture on it, I think, a year ago. We have people who come from completely different backgrounds, who have run massive businesses and sort of come from this other side rather than pure politics, who have, now at age, 65, decided to do a master's in politics or philosophy. It's quite a very interesting group of people.
Absolutely, yeah, brilliant. And there you are as well, a keen political observer. But there's obviously always more, isn't there, to individual stories. And when we sort of made contact, which essentially via LinkedIn, you then put up one of your most recent blog posts. So I had the opportunity of going in there and having a bit of a read, and all of a sudden the world that is and the journey that was or has been Anna's journey began to sort of blossom in my mind. And when I look at, I had another look this earlier today at one of the blogs that you had written, and this wonderful line, which I'll probably put up as perhaps the title of this one, is that you love telling stories.
Yes.
Yeah. Would you like to tell us a story, or just tell us where this comes from and so on?
So it's this whole experience of me starting to write has been very unexpected for me too. I finished my dissertation. I'm a big procrastinator, so I sort of wrote it in about a week. Also under the help of Dr. Tajvidi. He's a big sort of person in my life, academically and personally. And as soon as I submitted it, I sort of felt this creative rush, and I was like, what, I should write a blog. And I typed in, blog, whatever, and it comes up. They already have a blog page. And it turns out, 6 months earlier, when I was feeling down, I had created this blog that I intended to write, use it as a diary and not really publish. And that first post never got really published, and I opened it up, read through it, thought, well, this is very depressing and sad, so I started changing it line by line, and I ended up writing the first ever post, which is a reflection on a cycle, and within an hour I published it, and that was it. Sort of I realized through my dissertation, which I wrote on my sort of personal cultural history and family history about Latvia, Russia, Germany, I just realized that I had written my own story in a dissertation form, and now it was time to tell the rest of it, sort of. And yeah, so I tell stories. I've always have, and now I'm hoping to do it, more professionally.
No, I tell you, I'm looking forward to it because you have such a sincerity in the way that you communicate. I mean, I can't put myself down as any kind of opinion giver, as in not, at least not an opinion that people should necessarily follow. But with you, I think it's very, very clear. Your sincerity comes through straight away. And along with that is a certain degree of depth. But I have a feeling you don't have to work at that because you're just really open, aren't you?
Yeah, I that's sort of the blessing and also the curse is an incredibly open about anything. I've always sort of tried to be this way, but especially the last 2-3 years, I'd say, I just realized that life is too short to not be honest, especially to yourself. And I think I've talked a lot with my friends recently about art, and we've listened to a lot of music and sort of so many creative things that people have produced, and we realize that what makes them great is that people do not shy away to tell their story, to be honest, to even if it shocks you, if it hurts you hearing it, that's all right. This is exactly what sort of is supposed to happen if you talk about pain or suffering. So yeah, it's to me, I can't imagine living any other way, I think. So sort of I've always been very open, very emotional person. So yeah, I take everything in very intensely.
Okay, yeah, I mean that does come through, but I'm also hoping to tap into that raw emotion, but I don't think I'll have to work too hard for it, which is brilliant.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, can you also tell me a bit about your sort of story? So you suggested, okay, Latvian, Russian, German. Now, obviously, you're in the UK as well. That's a lot of sort of cultural diversity right there, isn't it?
Yes, I have loads of friends who are much more culturally diverse than I am because I just cover a bit of Europe. But I have to say it's been quite interesting to discover it bit by bit myself as well. I can, sort of shortly tell my story. I was born in Latvia. I grew up in this tiny, tiny town of, I think, 7,000 people living there, not far from the Russian border. I grew up quite a happy child. Everything was sort of all right. And then, life happened and economy completely collapsed. And my mother and my father, they decided to move to Germany because my mom's father is German and they had been living in Hanover for the last 25-30 years. And so, we moved to Germany. Neither of us spoke a word of German. We had no idea what we were really doing, but we sort of hoped, we have some family there. It's going to work out either way. And you know what? It did. It was incredibly hard. There's so many stories of for all of us that were painful, and I think that part of my life is why I'm so empathetic as well, especially to people that are immigrants or people coming from different life stories, because I understand how tough it can be. And I'm white, I have blonde hair, blue eyes. I don't necessarily stand out in a crowd of German people, but without having any language or having an accent or not knowing certain things, it is at age of 12 when I moved to Germany, that's quite a biggie. And yeah, I ended up finishing high school quite well, but I knew that I wouldn't stay in Germany because it just wasn't my place. I didn't feel at home. And, I was dating someone who was studying in London, and I looked at universities in London, found international relations, and left. And I've been here since. This is my third summer in London, and it probably was one of my best decisions in life.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, again, you did say the word brief before, so you kind of jumped through lots and lots there.
Yeah.
But this idea of, it wasn't my, I didn't fit in. It wasn't my place. It wasn't for me. And I get this a lot from different impressions which I receive through reading other people's sort of stories, biographies, or articles. Can you articulate the sense a little bit more? What it, not necessarily as a critique of Hanover or German society, but what is it which made you perhaps feel somewhat out of place here or in Germany? And can you in any way sort of put a finger on it, and then maybe other people would say, "Oh, actually, do you know what? I feel that way as well. Maybe I should move." If as in, from a positive perspective, if
Yeah.
that's possible.
I think for me, in the first place, I never wanted to go. That was, it wasn't really up to me. I understood that it was something that would benefit me in the future. But when you're 12, if you don't really want to go, but you don't really have a choice, then, you just suck it up and go. But in general, I think my personality is just different to the German sort of culture in a way. I can't really. It's a very, very weird one. For example, I see London to be so much more sort of open and easygoing, and sort of, less rules, less sort of protocol to follow. You can sort of, if you find a creative way to solve your problem, that's all right. Whereas in Germany, you have to follow certain procedures and protocols, and, you have these certain things set up. And if you don't necessarily have, as a kid, if you don't have the Longchamp bag, or if you don't have the Hollister top, you're standing out. Although these are these small things, and I assume, these are, it applies all over the world of not fitting in as a teenager. But for me, the things that they wanted just didn't align with my view, I think. And I've always been sort of a free spirit. My mum always said, I had super, super long hair when I was a kid, and I would never put it in a ponytail because I just loved running around with my hair blowing in the wind. And, so I think that is where it comes from, essentially, is that Germans are much more structured and have much more sort of control over things and want to keep things, within set of rules, where I really don't.
Mm. Okay. And could you also educate me perhaps a little bit on sort of Latvian culture? So I love this idea of you being extremely independent, sort of a free spirit. So I have absolutely zero concept of what life is or the culture would be like in Latvia. I would not automatically assume it was perhaps quite similar to Russian. But please tell me, am I completely wrong there?
No, it's funny. I know that a lot, if any Latvians listen to this, I might get some hate for it, but I will have to say we are not that different to Russian people. And that's purely because of the history that we have together. It's, you can't deny, what was it, 60 years of communism, where we all sort of lived under the same rules. You can't deny the effect on people and the culture and the country in general. And I know that, Latvia is really trying to be European or Western European at the moment, but they shouldn't be denying the fact that there's a lot of similarity to Russian culture as well. But in general, I would describe Latvian people as very sort of nature loving, and sort of, when everything goes well, we truly, and when you can really open up and see a Latvian open up, it's a very beautiful experience. But in general, I think some people can be a bit colder, and people don't easily trust other people or sort of outsiders, because purely of the history that we've had. We've always been occupied by some sort of country. If you look at our history, is there's we have, like, I don't know, 30 years of independence total. But yeah, there's loads of nature. There's emphasis on tradition. There's, every single Latvian knows how to dance Latvian traditional dances. We all know how to sing Latvian traditional songs. We are sort of we also refer to ourselves sometimes as the nation of singing and dancing, which is quite common across the Baltic states. So yeah, it's the reality of living there is a bit different to the spirit of the Latvian, but that's not their own fault. I think that's, so many other influences and come into it that you can't necessarily always be true to your nature.
Well, no, of course. I mean, humans, as much as we tend not to think it's the case, we actually do adapt. Even though we do we are quite repetitive. We're naturally very conservative with a small c. But we also can adapt when the need arises. So I absolutely take what you say on board. As you may have noticed also from my name, there is an Armenian sort of origin to that. So I was never born in the Armenia that exists today, or that was a part of the Soviet Union. But in 1990, I visited Yerevan and saw the Red Army and how life was over there. So I can appreciate that Latvian culture through the sort of domination of Soviet politics would have naturally levitated towards a slightly more Russian way of living, at least in certain ways.
Absolutely, but I do have to say, we Latvians, through all the oppression and cultural oppression a lot as well, the Latvians have always found a way how to. We have this like amazing singing and dancing festival every 4 years. And it's been going through with all the communism years, and we have always found a way how to preserve our culture, how to continue teaching it to the kids, even though sometimes it was forbidden, or it was looked down upon if you were speaking Latvian in certain situations. But people just there is a resilience to the Latvian person which I really admire. I just wish we would all see it as I see it, and stop being so easily influenced by everything around us, and sort of be like, okay, what is it that makes us great? And sadly, the criticism culture in Latvia is very, very strong as well. There's this sort of saying, the best breakfast for a Latvian is another Latvian. Which sometimes I have to say is true, but I don't think that that's the ultimate spirit of us as a nation. So
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, it is fascinating because we can have, at least in some ways, a partly sort of cultural exchange. Because I feel the Armenian culture is also managed to maintain a certain level of independence throughout the Soviet time, even though the Armenian language was adapted in the 1920s to become a bit more to develop similarities with the Russian language. But I mean, I don't know if you had that sort of cultural variation to that extent in Latvia too. Are you aware?
As far as I'm aware, obviously Russian became one of the state languages, and most of the sort of official documents and all of those issues and situations were solved and people spoke Russian. But as I think Latvia really slipped through very well, because we were always considered sort of one of the most influential countries, I think, in Soviet times, because we had the access to the Baltic Sea, and we had loads of trade, and if you wanted to have a really nice coat, you might go to Latvia to get it. And we were sort of, compared to a lot of other states, we were quite fortunate, and there was loads of always, even back in centuries ago, the Russian people would come and sort of buy massive lands, and same with aristocrats from Germany. And Latvia has always been seen as this sort of slightly above place where foreigners would like to come and enjoy it, which obviously benefited the Latvian people a lot as well, because we didn't suffer as much in certain aspects. But on the other hand, we had the deportations. Hundreds of thousands of people were deported in a few nights to Siberia. We also partook in the Holocaust, sadly, which is something that the Latvians usually tend to skip over in history. There's a lot of things that we try to sort of collectively erase from our historical memory as a nation, which I think is it's a bit not that great, but mildly.
Yeah, I mean, they're part of, how should we say, a pretty elite club in a certain sense, because the Brits and the Americans, I think, also try to do this. Have done this for many, many years. And other nations don't have that approach necessarily. But I mean, the fact that you're aware of it would suggest to me that not all is lost. Obviously, it still gets through. People are still aware.
I think that's mostly to attribute to the fact that I went to Germany, and I had history lessons in Germany for 8 years, which is, at least one semester you spend talking about the Second World War, the Holocaust, the importance of all of these things, and sort of how to spot propaganda. And you in Germany, there's a big emphasis on what went wrong, and how that it's always sort of emphasize that it's our responsibility to make sure that this never happens again, as although we are not responsible for the Holocaust or for the actions that were done to certain people or minorities. And in fact, the fact that it had on so many people's lives is not our fault, but is our responsibility to make sure we do not repeat this again. And I think that's a really beautiful approach to it. Especially as this is exactly why my life is so interesting, to me at least, is in Latvia you kind of completely ignore the Holocaust bit. In Germany you fully embrace it, and then you have Britain, who in their educational system don't discuss imperialism, British imperialism. They sort of skip over it and maybe mention a few good parts. And these are the differences where I go, okay, well, in this fight Germany is winning.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what is also very interesting for me is how, when we're talking about Latvia, you use the pronoun we, and also when talking about the German approach to the Holocaust and responsibility, you also said we, I think also maybe even with British representation. So I mean, you actually really feel Latvian, German, and British, I guess.
Yeah, I feel wherever I am, that's what I feel. I think, everybody, we all take a little part of wherever we are with us. And, I don't really like labels too much. I don't like putting myself in just one category. I've never felt comfortable with being, just this one thing or one person. As a kid, I was like, I don't know what I want to be, but I don't just want to be one person. I don't want to be just one career or one title. It doesn't feel right to me. And I think a lot of people feel the same way, but the world that we live in is sort of, you can only be this or that. You can't be everything, which I don't think is true. So yeah, I carry all the identities with me.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. But it does, also exhibit the level of your empathy. So if you can adopt certain characteristics within a certain community quite quickly, it shows that you allow it to enter you, don't you? You become a part of it quite quickly, and I think that has to be connected to empathy.
I believe so, yes. It's also not, it's not always peachy and easy being an empath, sort of connecting to everything and everyone. I mean, I last year, I had this beautiful balcony, and it had like these beautiful rose bushes everywhere. And I connected to them so much because it was sort of locked down, and, I was sitting out in the sun, and I had my little private space, and then obviously it had to be chopped down because otherwise it would grow too much, gardening things. And I was full on crying because my rose bushes were being cut off, although I knew they will be, growing back. So I do connect truly to quite literally everything. So it's can be good. Sometimes it can also be the demise of me or my day.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, you touch on so many important sort of historical events. So you talked about the Holocaust there. I mean, just out of pure curiosity, because whenever I go for a walk through Berlin, which is where I am, we have these, sort of square brass plaques on the floor where a family or an individual had been deported from a home. And I mean, there are some streets where I walk down. It's completely, horrifying because there's a home where or a building or flats, I should say, where there are 10 plaques outside. So either 10 people or 10 families were deported from that one building alone. And sort of with my son, we kind of calculate from our home to his school, how many are on a given street. And once we reached just one side of the street, I think there was like 112 in a very short street. Do these plaques also exist in Hanover?
Yes, I think they're referring, or they call them Stolpersteine. It's sort of stumbling stones, basically, where you stumble over them and then you read them, sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yes, of course we have them in Hanover as well, and Hanover has always been sort of a important part in German history. Although the city itself, in my view, is not that exciting. The Queen of England, she comes from a Hanover bloodline and from the royal houses back in the day. And, all of these sort of little things always have been influential. But, you probably know, the fact why Germans have these great autobahns is because Hitler had this whole project. He developed these roads so it's easier for him to invade Poland. And Hanover is sort of very much the cross point for loads of these big sort of roads in Europe in general. So, we do have sort of loads of people coming in and out, and it's always had some sort of influence. And yeah, absolutely. Hanover was as impacted by history as any other state or any other city in Germany. So yeah, it's an interesting place, definitely. And I think I don't know if this is true or just my history teacher wanted us to feel much more love or appreciation for Hanover, but they said that the English, I think, bombed Hanover because it was one of the prettiest cities, and they were sort of, that was revenge for bombing some other British town. So you can carry that if you want to it. So, some honor.
Yeah, I'm not aware of a city that I've visited in Germany that wasn't bombed by the Allies, should we say? It's very difficult today to go to anywhere in any sort of major urban environment in Germany, and think it was completely destroyed in the Second World War, and there are so many that were absolutely destroyed.
Yeah, Hanover was pretty hard. Like, I think it was one of the worst ones, according to Hanover residents, obviously. So if it's true, I can't verify that.
Is there also like a Teufelsberg in Hanover where they basically just put all of the rubble, built up a little mountain, and just let the sort of moss and grass grow over it, and it became like a mountain?
No, I don't think there is one in Hanover, but I do know that basically all of the old town was completely destroyed. And one of my history teachers actually took us on a tour, and if you look at the buildings, you can see where the stones are a different color, and you can then tell how far down the house was bombed, and where they rebuilt it sort of a few years after. So you can literally sort of see how bad the damage was.
Yeah. I mean, I'm always surprised that there are still these, Altbau, these sort of old construction buildings in Berlin, because it was completely devastated, and yet some monuments survived somehow. So, interesting. Okay, all right. And so, Latvia, you left at the age of 12. You then moved to Hanover, and you were there for 8 years.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So then you moved to the UK, pretty much a young adult, at the age of 20.
Yes.
And your first. So I don't want to jump ahead of everything, but I think that there's so much in your blogs that I really believe people should make the effort and read it. And I will put a link to your blog as well in the podcast notes. But your first impressions of London were such that you wanted to return to Hanover. Is that correct?
It was a tough one. It wasn't necessarily I wanted to return. I was so the relationship I mentioned, I wasn't aware of how I wasn't in touch with my own feelings at the time, and I remember moving the first day arriving in London and realizing I didn't really want to be here with this specific person. And sort of the relation, I've never lived on my own. I moved out and, moved in with a boy, and, it's sort of it's a lot of intense emotions for a 20-year-old moving into a big city on their own. And then, as life would have it, a couple of months after we broke up, and then that's when I sort of had my big first adult crisis that I had to deal with, because he had lived here for a few years before that, so he had all the cutlery and the plates and you name it, anything you need to survive, and he took it with him, of course, because it was his, and I was literally left in my apartment with 2 coffee mugs that I had bought from H&M Home. And that was it. Didn't have kettle. I didn't have, a toaster. I didn't have anything. And so in that moment, I was like, what am I doing? London is breaking me. This is horrible. What have I done? Am I ever going to be able to survive this? This city is so intense. And I always say I have the biggest love-hate relationship with London, because I love it so, so, so much, but I also hate it so, so, so much sometimes. So yeah, it wasn't completely like, oh, I've made it, this is my dream. It was sort of like, oh, reality's tough.
Yeah, and how important is a kettle to London life, or British life, I should say?
I think you can't live without. I make about 15 cups of tea a day. I think that's the part of British that I have taken over. I cannot live without a kettle now.
Yeah, people find it a bit strange whenever I've been in a situation where I'm helping a friend to move. I'm like, no, you don't pack the kettle. The kettle's not packed. Yeah, you take the kettle and you put it in the new kitchen. You make sure it's filled with water and it's on the boil. Yeah,
exactly.
You don't want to go digging into the boxes, because as soon as you arrive at a new property, you need to make yourself a cup of tea or a cup of coffee. You can't go looking for where's the kettle. I mean, surely, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. I know some people decide that that's not the case. There's a certain logic, I think, to it, but I don't know. I could be wrong. But yeah. So, but another thing, and I'm jumping around a little bit, but I have to go where the sort of emotion, as it were, or the storyline takes me, because when I think of settling down and having a tea, I always think of a good conversation, and like a wonderful conversation always needs a kind of beverage, whether that's hot or cold. Is a different matter, but I do recall reading that you used to go, I think while you were still in Hanover, for long conversations. You used to walk down the road, is it with a cousin, and you used to have long conversations late into the night? Is that
yeah?
Do I remember this correctly?
Yes. My cousin is basically, to me, my cousin is like my sister. Growing up, we were quite close, and then sort of, as we were both teenagers, and we sort of grew apart. But then she moved to Hanover, and actually she married a guy who she met in Hanover. They live in Thailand now. She just had her second child. It's sort of a fairy tale story, but she ended up moving down the street from me into this apartment, and every Friday I would go over, and we would have a wine night, and sometimes these wine nights would be like, okay, let's go outside and have a long conversation and see where it takes us. But yes, I have always sort of found someone to have a very long conversation at the end of the week with, all throughout my life. So yeah, I like talking, as you can probably tell.
Well, that's great. I mean, anybody who wants to do any kind of interview or conversation and record it, you'd be a dream person to have with them. Not only for the fact that you so many interesting stories, but the fact that you're so willingly partying with them, it makes what I do easy, at least. Yeah, and okay, but so this also goes back to what we were talking about before, as in being a storyteller. So when you sit down and have a conversation, people not everybody is open. Not everybody is willing to share. So there are some people who love to just listen, and I tell stories too, but I do enjoy being in the company of other storytellers, because then I feel, I can take the night off, and I can listen to other people's tales and really enjoy that. This is a part of you, isn't it? This sort of storytelling element. It really is.
Yeah, and if I'm completely honest, I think one of the biggest reasons why I do it is to encourage others. Sort of, this is a natural thing. People always say, "Oh, you're my therapist. I'm my unofficial therapist," and I go, well, yeah, I have therapy myself too. Thank goodness. Otherwise, it would get a bit too much. But I've, even more recently, I've been very outspoken about women's issues, and I've been outspoken about my sexuality, and I've been outspoken about, all of these things that might be taboo for certain people. Even my mother, she always sort of texts me like, "Why did you have to post this? Why did you have to say this? Does everybody have to know that, you use antidepressants?" And I go, well, I'm telling my story however I can, and whoever it reaches, it might help them, and it actually a lot of the times does. So many people reach out to me and say, "Hey, I'm also struggling," or we then start having a conversation about their issues by me being vulnerable, by me opening up and saying, "Hey, this is part of the human experience. This is nothing to hide. This is nothing to be scared of." If we all just sort of stop hating each other and stop projecting all of these things towards each other, the world would be just so much more peaceful and easier to navigate. So yeah, I think part of my storytelling is to encourage others to share as well.
And because when you say antidepressants, I get this, I always sort of am brought back to the really typical storylines that you see on, TV series. Oh, God, he's on antidepressants, and oh, I'm sorry, are you okay? I mean, as somebody who takes this kind of medication, what would you prefer a person's response to be? I know you can't dictate how other people respond, but I mean, if for example you were one day to imagine saying to a person, "Oh, I have to take antidepressants," how would your ideal response from such a person be? What would you love for somebody to actually say?
Good for you, I think.
Okay.
That's sort of because I personally do not believe that medication is the answer for everything. I have been in therapy since I was 18. I've been working on myself quite a lot. I read loads of books. Irvin Yalom is like the god for me. That's my Bible. His books, especially Love's Executioner. I definitely suggest for anyone who's interested in psychology and sort of great storytelling. It's a collection of 10 short stories from his own practice as a therapist. Sometimes your brain chemistry, you can't control it, and I can't control mine, and my brain chemistry doesn't let me live my life to the fullest. So I have a very low dose of Lexapro. And I take it once a day, and it helps me get out of bed. It helps me function. It helps me control my emotions. It helps me, regulate my life. And it's not a solution. It's a sort of temporary little helper accompanied with therapy and work on yourself, that enables you to actually do this work, because otherwise you're too absorbed into this, whatever it is, whatever condition you have. And sometimes you do just need a little bit of a medical help to help you get out of the mess and be able to work on it and build your life up and carry it on with you. And I think the stigma around it is absolutely horrible, because end of the day, my uncle committed suicide over a year ago. He was never diagnosed, but at the end he had paranoia, mania. He thought he was being followed. He thought he's going to get killed. He thought that someone's going to come and kill the whole family, and he ended up committing suicide. And the doctor who saw him, the first ever doctor, just gave him sleeping pills, and that was in Latvia. And nobody really speaks about it. Nobody likes to speak about it. I know that if my mum hears this, she's going to be like, why did you mention it? But it is part of reality. It's, it's also made me confront my own mental health much more seriously, because now I have someone in my family that, clearly didn't manage it well. And it's not his fault. It's, growing up in Soviet Latvia, and then he lived in Ireland for most of his life, not really having anyone to talk to, not being in an environment where it's okay to talk about depression or whatever it is. It just got worse to the point where he couldn't take it. And if me saying these few lines and spending, 10 minutes a day talking about it can help someone actually reach out and get help and save their lives and improve their quality of life, like, to me, that's a no-brainer.
Yeah, absolutely. And and still we should also recognize the courage you have of speaking about it, because it is still a taboo, isn't it? I mean, mentioning antidepressants, depression in itself, going to psychologists, suicide, these are things which people sort of tend to hush up and whisper about, because they don't want sort of communities, groups to be aware of them. So there is a very clear sort of courageousness about the way that you just you open the front door and you say, this is the way it is. And it's nice to hear.
I saw a video recently that said, why are you so stressed about it? It's not like you're going to make it out alive anyway. And it's sort of, it's sort of, I never knew that this is exactly sort of how I approach so many things. To me, it's like, well, if you want to, hate on me for being open about this, well, go ahead. It doesn't really bother me. It's, if it helps people, it helps people. It doesn't really sort of doesn't have an effect on me. And I don't see myself as, some sort of incredible holy figure doing this. As I said, this is just my nature. I've always been very open about things that are happening to me and things that I experience. So, yeah.
Yeah, and sorry to hear about your uncle's passing. I mean, this is also what you say. It's there is a similar thing with the Armenians have a saying about when people don't want to spend money. They say, why? You're not going to take it with you when you die, are you?
Exactly.
And we can sort of superimpose that principle over life in general, as you say, quite clearly. Live it, because time does run out at some point.
Absolutely. And I have been confronting myself with the horrible realization of we're all going to die one day. And it's not an easy topic, obviously, and not people in my life who are older don't even want to acknowledge it, or, they sort of pretend that they're not going to die one day, which I think is a bit silly, because that's the only certainty that we have in life. And it's a tough one. It's a tough one. There's a reason why the philosophers have been arguing about it for so long.
Yeah, and they will continue to do so, and then perhaps pass away in the process. But
yeah,
that's a different matter. You also mentioned in your talk before about your interest in speaking out about sort of gender equality, if I'm not mistaken. This is also a big topic for me as well, because I feel men have to support the other genders to allow them to reach this level of equality, because only then can society be truly liberated. And I also extend that thought to other forms of discrimination, which we've also seen this week, emphasized in the media because of Rashford, Sancho, and Zaka. I mean, how do you see, because you've got this insight into 3 different cultures, or maybe even 4 if we include Russia. How do you see the sort of differences in how women are treated across these cultures?
It's a tough one. Funnily enough, I'd say Latvia is sort of one of the best and the worst at the same time. It's a very weird one, but if you look, for example, we like to compare statistics, and the easiest way to do it is you look at how many women are in powerful positions, how many women, work full time, and all of these different kind of categories that you can look at. And I have to say, the Soviet Union has always been sort of an example for the West, I would say, because in the Soviet times there wasn't really you do this and I do that. It was sort of everybody works, everybody sort of takes part in the society to a certain extent. But then on the other hand, there's the typical sort of, well, the woman still is the one to cook, to clean, to raise the children, to it's sort of both. And I still, we had a Latvian president, Vaidavīķa Freiberga, who's a massive she's a massive idol for me. She grew up in Morocco and Canada and, all of these other places, and then came back at sort of a later stage in her life and became the first ever female president in Latvia. We have loads of women in politics. We have loads of women, who have companies, who are CEOs, who, have sort of important positions. But then at the same time, there is still a lot of sort of patriarchal, structures around that you just can't seem to escape. And I think if you look at Germany, it's sort of getting there as well. But if you look at the top level, because sort of the game is a bit different, the top level of Latvia is, you might be a billionaire with a few billion, but in Germany, if you're a billionaire, it's sort of a bigger deal. And I know that I've heard stories of many women who, work at a big bank or something, and then they're brought onto the board just to fill the quota. And then the men literally in the boardroom meeting go, you're only here because we need you for the statistics. We don't actually care. So that is an issue there as well. And I think it's very similar in Britain. But England, oh, Jesus, it's a tough one, especially recently. With the football game, obviously, that happened on Sunday. I was out watching and rooting for England. I thought, I don't really care for football that much, but I was sort of saying, if I'm here, then I'm gonna fully embrace it and screamed England as passionately as everybody else. But I have to say, as a woman, I was petrified of what is going to happen either way, lose or win, because to me, what we saw on Sunday is that wasn't men, that wasn't fans, that wasn't normal behavior. That was just animalistic, just absolutely disgusting behavior, and it was just enabled by men themselves. There's all these stories about how in the UK women still have to give birth basically alone, or be throughout the process of giving birth be alone in the hospital because having their partner there is sort of too much because of COVID restrictions. But then you fill a whole stadium with football fans, and you allow all the pubs to have all these people, all of these sort of things where you, as a woman especially, you go, how is it that football is more important than giving birth in this society? So I do sort of, I'm very confronted with all of these sort of issues of not being taken seriously. Sorry, recently I had an incident with my flatmate who harassed my other female flatmate as she was alone, in her room. And, the response of the landlord is, oh, he's a good guy. I'm going to speak to him, but he's a good guy. And we are all three women living here. And it's sort of, take us seriously. We've been saying this forever. Same with Sarah Everand, a couple of months ago in London, a woman who was kidnapped and murdered by a police officer, right? So there are all these issues arising, and these are just, a few examples among many. And as you said, we need men to also participate in this, because we've been saying it for hundreds of years, that we've been mistreated, that there's so many issues, but somehow it doesn't seem that anyone hears it. And as soon as a man sort of says it, it's heard. So although I do not like the approach of a man saving, the women in this sort of situation, it is necessary. We do need men to speak up. I have a few friends who actually sat down their best friends and had a conversation about everything that is going on and said, your behavior is not okay, and I'm going to be calling you out on it. And that is the only way we can combat this whole situation. And it's not only applied to women or men or it's applied to everything. Call your friends out. Don't let it slip. Rape jokes turn into rape. Racist jokes turn into racial assault all the time. So words do matter. And if you want to do your part and you don't quite know what to do, I would just say, keep your eyes and ears open and don't be afraid to confront people in your life.
Yeah, absolutely. And what would also be nice would be that, other random strangers also stand up. Often, there was a video from somebody's phone some months ago in Germany where a young Muslim kid was harassed on a tram, I think, and nobody got up to assist. One person obviously recorded the incident, but nobody really got up to help. And I would stress, it's a you never know what kind of crazy person is actually there, if they're armed with a knife or something else. But at least raise your voice. Shout from a distance,
Absolutely, I agree with that. And it's so scary how many racial assaults are happening in Germany as well, still to this day, which is, to me, just mind-boggling, especially against Muslim people as well, because I feel like Germany they really can't afford to do this,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, but also, Jewish people in Germany still feel a certain degree of fear, and it does make you kind of, think, why is it that there are so many different, sort of parts of society where they feel, okay, if Muslims are being, abused and discriminated against, then we'll go out and harass a few Jews, and that will balance it out. And no, nothing balances that out anything. What is this craziness?
Absolutely. I can't stress this enough. Please, people, stop hating. Stop hating. I know you're afraid, and I know that's why you are being so toxic in certain situations. Please educate yourself. If you're afraid of something, read about it. See what it actually is. Don't just listen to fake news. Don't take anyone's word for it. Please, just let's make this world better. I can't, it's very disheartening sometimes when you look at the news. It's just, you sort of go, where is this going? If we're not going to change anything, where is this going?
Yeah, sentiments that I can only share and completely agree with. Moving on to a more, should we say, positive note. I think talking about gender equality and also anti-discrimination must be always considered overall in a positive light, because the journey is obviously towards that promised land. But you have, artistic elements as well, which I'd love to touch upon, because it's not limited to writing, is it? So you've done modeling, but generally speaking, you are a bit of you like the arts.
I love the arts. Yes, I'm a massive fan of music. Sometimes I just sit here, blast music, and listen to every single little sound and layer that someone has produced, and I'm just absolutely in awe. And I sort of, I think because I'm quite a creative person myself, and I don't always know how to express it, I really appreciate when people are able to sort of translate whatever they're feeling and seeing into art. So I love the arts. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, and have you considered the performing arts? Is that also perhaps an avenue that you've looked at, or is that not what you'd like to do?
Well, I've been a dancer my whole life since I was about 2 or 3 years old. I started dancing Latvian traditional dances until one day I decided not to go in, and that's it. I said to my mum, nope, I'm not doing it anymore. I've been dancing. Then as a kid, I danced hip hop. And when I moved to Germany, I met amazing teachers. I went to an amazing dance school. And it sort of all took off from there. And that was very important to me as well, because dancing has always been a big part of my life. And then as it happened, I ended up dancing for multiple dance crews who had gay coaches. And as someone from Latvia, where, before I had seen a person of color just once before in my life, really in Latvia, to, going to Germany that is super diverse, but also sort of being introduced from this super young age to different sexualities and expressions and, just different people from different walks of life. It really shaped my understanding and sort of the way I look at people, I think. So yeah, I danced my whole life. Sadly, not that much in London. Dance studio prices are quite high. But yeah, it's still sort of a big part of my life. I do dance around a lot in my underwear sometimes. So.
Okay, fair enough. I would never do that, even when I'm completely alone. But yeah, okay, good to know.
This thing, you're either the naked neighbor or you have a naked neighbor. And I am the naked neighbor. I have to admit, I am the naked neighbor.
Yeah, all of your neighbors suddenly, bringing up, opening up their curtains and hoping for a view. I have a podcast as well with a lady called Tanya, and she is also crazy about dancing. She's into bachata. Are you familiar with this kind of dance?
Yes, I am familiar. I've never actually fully embraced it, sadly. But I remember I went to Colombia just after I graduated school, and went to a few clubs, and it was definitely very, very fun. It was definitely very fun.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, dancing is definitely something you need to have a passion for. It also feel good doing it, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So if you're somebody like me who doesn't feel good doing it, then have a beer. But if you if you do feel it, you feel that rhythm, you feel the mood take you, then I can only imagine dancing must be heavenly.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I've been pretty disconnected from it compared to when I was, 15, 16, where I would spend, 10, 15 hours a week dancing, preparing for competitions. And, it would always be in these dance groups, which would provide me with a great community. And, we would call each other family because, that's sort of how much time we spent together and how we really got along. It was great. I never really fit into school, and there's so many other things, and that really provided me a safe space and a great friends for many years. Sadly, now we've sort of all parted our ways, but that's just the natural sort of progression of things. So no hard feelings there.
Yeah, but it always opens the door to finding new groups, isn't it? So it's never a closed door, and you're still very young, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, there's a lot of dancing left in your legs, I think.
I truly hope so, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and also, a bit more of sort of crossover with topics as well with Tanya, because she's sort of created a group for women, and other genders are welcome, she says, quite openly, to talk about sensuality and sexuality too. So that's something that you obviously brought up in your dance group. It's important, isn't it, to experience these other people, the way that they live their lives from a younger age, because then when you grow up, it's not strange. It is much easier to embrace when you're used to it, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think there was, bringing it back to politics a little bit, but to make this point, I remember when I was in school, there was sort of, elections going on, and the party AfD, which is obviously very sort of phobic in every single sense of the word. Sort of the statistics said people who voted most for these sort of right-wing, nearly extremist parties, those were the people who lived in areas that had the least amount of immigrants in Germany. Which sort of makes my point of, if you're not surrounded by it, if you don't know about it, you're scared of it, and I think that is the same for many people which is ridiculous to me. Like, a person is a person. To me, it never mattered who you sleep with, what color your skin is, where you come from. It does not matter to me. If you're a good person, you're a good person. If you're a shitty person, you're a shitty person. That's as simple as it is, at least in my eyes.
Yeah, it's wonderful. I mean, and also when we look back at history, if we talk about, some of the most successful concepts or discoveries or whatever, simplicity is the key, isn't it? And even mathematics tells us we should simplify to bring order to chaos. So, yeah, it may be simplistic, but it's, very, very true as well.
Absolutely.
No, okay, all right. 1 hour is normally where people who have huge attention spans start to look towards the kettle again. So, I mean, Anna, a brilliant conversation, and I can't stress enough. We sort of talked for 2 minutes before I clicked the record button. We hardly know each other still.
Yes.
And I really hope that we have many more of these talks, because there are so many topics that you have these wonderful, open and diverse views upon that I would love to tap into from time to time, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely, I would love to do this again. It's been an absolute pleasure, honestly, and this has been my first podcast ever, my first ever interview. I'm incredibly scared to hear my voice from a speaker. I don't think I will listen to this ever again. I will just send it to my friends and be like, tell me what you think. That's about it. But yes, thank you so much for having me on. It's been an amazing opportunity for me as well. So yeah, big thanks to Dr. Tajweedi.
Absolutely, yeah, and we'll send him a message as well. I mean, hopefully I'll be able to have a talk with him too when he's back in the UK. So that would be nice as well.
Yes.
Yeah, brilliant. Anna, thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure. The journey of getting to know you is only a few steps old, and yeah, I hope it's got a long way to go. Speak to you again very, very soon.
Yes, indeed. Thank you so much for having me on here.